Hello, my Lynn N Things family and friends. Welcome on back to the channel, guys. I'm so happy to see you here. It is Saturday, and you know what that means. It is story time with Lynn time, y'all. And we have been reading the most beautiful book, The Story and Life of Miss Cicelt Tyson. Oh my gosh, I've truly been enjoying sharing this book with you guys. Though I am reading you the book, I am not reading it in its entirety because I do not own the rights. And then we also still want people, if they would like to purchase the book, to buy the book. So I am just reading bits and parts of the book, parts that I feel like, I want to share with you guys, and just some very poignant parts of it. The whole book is just so filled with so much that you need to go out and get the book. If you really want to keep this and treasure, I am so happy that I have it. It was a gift to me, and oh, what a gift it is. One of the best books I've ever read. So if you've been keeping up with me, we are on chapter 17 this week, guys. Yay, we are really getting through this book. And I have truly been enjoying all of you guys' comments and commentary, your memories and things that it brings back or invokes in you, and you've been sharing it in the comment section. Please make sure to do so after today's reading. So I just want to welcome in to all my new subbies. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you so much for subbing to this channel. I truly, truly appreciate each and every one of you guys, whether you're very new here or you have been with me from day one. Thank you guys so much, all in between. If you are new, though, you'll probably have come to this channel because I do a lot of Dollar Tree hauls, Dollar Tree reviews. I do some Ray Dunn. I haven't been able to do it in a while, but I do love to showcase some Ray Dunn, DIYs, little cook with me's and things like that. I do a lot of things here, y'all. So that's why I am Lynn N Things, because I do a lot of different things here on my channel. But if those things interest you, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really does help the channel. And if you enjoy it, hit that like. That again too helps the channel to grow. I am just so amazed that we are almost at that 1,000. I cannot wait. I'm really gearing up for my 1,000 subby giveaway, and I can't do that until we reach it, guys. So go ahead and share these videos, whether it be the storytime videos or the Dollar Tree videos, whichever one that you are watching. Thank you so much for watching any of my videos. But yes, please go ahead, share, comment, like, do it all, y'all. It's free. Thank you so much. It only costs you a few minutes of your time, and if you're already watching, thank you for your time. So you guys know we always like to set the ambiance. I'm always lighting a candle. So I just decided to light the candle that I had last week, which was the mint candle that I found at the Aldi's like maybe a couple of weeks ago. So it's already permeating in the room, nice and light. And we're going to get to jumping into our next chapter. Okay, guys. So this chapter is titled The Ladder. With my spirit still ailing from the loss of my mother, I returned to work. When you're black in Hollywood, and frankly, when you're black and doing just about anything in this life, you don't have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines for too long. Work beckons amid the reality that when you slow down, so does your income. The wealth gap between blacks and whites in the United States, created by decades of systematic injustice, was as evident in the 1970s as it is now. That gap has always been more pronounced for black women. I don't know one black actress who works with the consistency of a white actress who has the same credentials. That truth holds when it comes to gender. Accomplished artists such as Angela Bassett, Viola Davis, and Halle Berry do not have nearly the same script opportunities as, say, Denzel Washington, or even Denzel, brilliant as he is, has fewer options than white male actors of his caliber. In every aspect of society, we black women find ourselves on the bottom rung of what I call the ladder. We are holding on for dear life, I tell you, surviving as our knuckles bleed. As a black actress, even when you're on the so-called pinnacle of your career, your choices are severely limited. Characters such as Bree Daniels in Clute, the 1971 film role for which Jane Fonda earned an Oscar, come along for a black artist perhaps once in a career, if at all. How can a black actress ever become a Meryl Streep or a Glenn Close if she cannot build the illustrious body of work that is generally available to actors of that stature? It's impossible. The opportunities, they're just not there for us, which is why I so strongly encourage the efforts of black screenwriters, scriptwriters, and directors. If our stories do not exist in the mainstream, in part because, despite evidence to the contrary, the industry's power brokers do not truly believe black protagonists will resonate with white audiences, we do not have the chance to showcase the full extent of our capabilities. That will change only as we continue bankrolling and scripting our own stories. We are subject to the dual scourges of racism and sexism, a reality articulated by the first black woman elected to Congress, Shirley Chisholm. In 1972, Shirley made history again as the first sister to launch a presidential bid as a major party candidate. In the end, she once said, anti-black, anti-female, and all forms of discrimination are equivalent to the same thing, anti-humanism. Shirley understood that we live in a world constantly seeking to reduce us as black women, be it through racism or sexism. The women's movement made its strides, and to be sure, many black women lifted their voices alongside their white counterparts. But in our America, precious little has shifted. In 1972, while promoting Sounder, I had traveled all over the country, speaking to mostly whites, including that journalist who couldn't believe Nathan's son had called him daddy, just as his own son referred to him. How could that be the case if Nathan, as this nation had taught him to believe, was more animal than human? Once I realized such ignorance abounded, I chose to become an ambassador of sorts, helping whites understand what clearly was not apparent to many, that black people experience the full spectrum of human emotions. With the success of the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman in 1974, my platform widened, and again I took to the road. Given that I was turning down roles left and right during the blaxploitation era, there were long stretches when I did not have enough work or enough money, often both. Speaking is how I remained solvent. For a full month every year throughout the 70s, I toured on college campuses, talking to young people about the roles that I had played, hoping to wield my microphone as a force for good. It was my way of picketing, my contribution to hastening the fulfillment of Dr. King's dream. Following a dry spell in film roles after Jane Pittman, I did play two characters that I'm proud of. The first was Coretta Scott King in the NBC miniseries King. I reunited with my co-star and Sounder, Paul Winfield. After our romance had faded, we remained quite fond of one another, a bond that surely bolstered our on-screen chemistry. He took the role of Dr. King, and boy did Paul embody him in both appearance and spirit. I'd never met Dr. King, but by the time I finished the series, I felt like I had. In 1977, Mrs. King, the essence of grace, invited me to stay with her in her Atlanta home while I was researching the role. We spent hours across from each other at the dining room table, covering the terrain of her love story with Martin, whom she'd lost nearly a decade before. He had a wonderful sense of humor, she told me, a lighthearted side the cameras often did not capture. She spoke of him, of the time that they had traded well-appointed Georgia home for a much more humble one because Martin, answering his passion's siren call, wanted to live among the impoverished. When I was decorating the bathroom, Coretta told me, I put a simple rug down on the floor in front of the shower and a matching cover on the toilet seat. When Martin saw the toilet seat cover, he said, we got to take this off, he says. I said, what are you talking about? He said, poor people don't have money to buy food. How are they going to buy a rug just to cover the toilet? I thought I would die laughing when she told me that story. So committed was Reverend King to the movement that he wanted every detail of his surroundings to reflect his rallying cry for justice. The same applied to the modest way that they dressed their 4 children. It's both a challenge and a blessing to portray someone who's still alive. The blessing is that the person is a living, breathing body of research that you can tap into. The challenge is that there's pressure to get it exactly right. For me, the process of portraying someone living is not markedly different from one I usually undertake. I listen, I watch, I smell and taste and touch and inhale. I take in every mannerism, every grimace and head turn, every smile and flutter of the eyelids. My intention was never to completely imitate Coretta, and I couldn't have if I tried. As an actor, I am not a puppet, but rather an open vessel, a channel through which a character flows. My portrayals are, in essence, an interpretation. With Coretta, I listen for the emotional truth beneath her words and gestures, with the hope of infusing my portrayal with that truth. And as an aside, I initially wore a full head weave for the role, but they brought in a stylist who put in the weave so tight I couldn't even sleep. My head was on fire. It was the first time I had ever worn a full weave. It was also the last. Send that guy back in here to take this stuff out of my head, I told the producer. From then on, I wore a wig. I asked Coretta about losing Martin. I recall seeing images of her at the funeral at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. The way that she had held close up in her lap daughter Bernice, then 5, as she stared straight ahead. She did not shed a tear. From afar, she appeared solemn and unflinching, like a soldier just called into battle. When I met her in person, she was the same. I asked her children whether they had seen her break down during the week of the funeral. They hadn't, which told me a lot about Coretta. Can you imagine what it takes to hear the news that your husband has been murdered, and then to restrain yourself from falling apart? Do you know the strength that it must have required for her to carry on in such circumstances? The kind of fortitude black women, time and time again, have been called upon to demonstrate. During the few weeks that I spent with Coretta in her home, I never once saw her cry. Not even when she was talking about losing the man she loved so much. That does not mean she was not devastated. In her private moments, I am sure she wept. But she knew she had to keep it together for the sake of her children and the country that was watching. She had a job to do, and the grieving would just have to wait. That is precisely how I felt when I lost my mother. I did not cry when Emily first told me Mom was gone. My initial shock immediately gave way to an urgent sense of responsibility to carry on with making arrangements. The morning will come later. The Bluebird was trouble from the very beginning. George Cukor, the American director, assembled a Russian crew, most of whom could not speak a lick of English. How is it that you're shooting a film in a foreign country and do not bring in a Russian translator or an associate director? It was a mess. And George often reverted to sign language to get his point across to the crew. Should have known better. The whole process was one big argument after another. At one point, my role required me to fly, leaping into the air toward a passing bird. The crew hoisted me up on ropes with the non-English speaking cinematographer down below, poised to film the shot. As I swung, he clearly was in the wrong position to capture the scene. He started screaming out directions in Russian like I could understand him. I was directed to shoot the scene again, so I got back into position. When I heard action, I leaped up. In the same song, second verse. I'm not doing this another time, I told the director. This cameraman has no idea what he's doing. The whole production was lost in translation. In fact, I'm not sure how we even got the film done. It was an absolute disaster. I later heard that George Cukor, who had been the original director of Gone with the Wind, until he was replaced, had wanted to turn The Bluebird into his Gone with the Wind. That approach obviously did not work, as the film was critically skewered upon release. And incidentally, I also heard that the movie's sound man had been madly in love with Liz Taylor. During filming, so went the grapevine chatter. The man wandered by Liz's dressing room to give her something. When she opened the door, she was wearing an old frock like a frumpy housewife, and her hair was all over the place. She wasn't the Liz Taylor of his fantasy, but a mortal just like the rest of us. From that day forward, it seems like everything with the production went south. Still, there was one bright spot while I was there. I got on well with Jane Fonda. She knew I had lost my mother, and when I arrived in Moscow, she embraced me. "Do you know how worried we were about you?" she said. I will always remember her kindness. On set and off, we talked constantly, and she was as passionate about her causes then as she is now. Through the early 70s, she had been protesting against the Vietnam War, a move that made some people question her patriotism. She is, at her core, a fighter, and a Sagittarian like me. In the United States, protest is our birthright, but when you exercise that right, you're often penalized for it. Jane, by then, had discovered that. I didn't spend much time offset with Ava Gardner or Liz Taylor, who was then Hollywood's darling. My dust up with Liz would come years later on a different project. Liz and I both took our pets with us to Moscow. She had 2 dogs. I don't recall the breeds, while I had my little Aspo called Stuff. For no reason in particular other than I just like that name. I spotted Stuff on the day that I left for Moscow. From the moment I saw that his little nose pressed up against the storefront glass window, I was smitten. In Moscow, Liz turned her dogs over to the caretaker of the property at which we had stayed, whereas I let Susan, the assistant traveling with me, care for Stuff. While we were on the set, working 18-hour days, the caretaker fell in love with Liz's dogs. Near the end of filming, Liz said to me, "I don't have the heart to ask him for them back," and she indeed left them in Russia. I brought Stuff home with me during that what turned out to be a thunderbolt of an exit. George had asked the crew to stay on a while longer to reshoot some scenes that his Russian-speaking crew had failed to capture. I refused. Our film dates outlined in my contract had already come and gone, and I was eager to get back to my life in the United States. A contract is a contract. Also, Moscow isn't exactly the tropics, and after weeks layered in every piece of clothing I packed, I was frozen. And then there was the bland Russian cuisine, which did little for my West Indian taste buds. I was cold, I was hungry, I was grieving my mother. Plus, I'd already committed to do another movie back in Los Angeles. Filming was to start shortly. I asked my assistant Susan to arrange my departure. No flights out of Leningrad were immediately available, so she booked me on a train from Leningrad to Zurich, and from there, after a tussle with airport officials who tried to ban me from traveling with my dog, I flew on to Los Angeles. I told no one in the crew that I was leaving. Somehow or another, while I was en route home, word got around to Frank Sinatra that Russia was giving me a hard time crossing its borders with a pet. Frank and I go way back to the days when we both played in the 1966 film A Man Called Adam. Frank called my agent Haber and said, "I hear they won't let Cicely out of Russia. Can I help?" What a gracious offer. But by then, child, I had already made my way back to the offices of 20th Century Fox, the distributor of The Blue Bird. While I was at the studio, one of the execs picked up the phone to call George in Russia. "Do you know what Cicely Tyson is?" the exec asked. "She's in her suite," George answered. "No, she isn't," the studio head said, laughing. "She's sitting here at my desk in Beverly Hills." Around the business, I have sometimes been called difficult. The truth is that I insist upon respect. I don't take any tea for the fever child. Even now, at age 96, I teach folks not to mess with me. The year after my mother went home to heaven, Miles went missing here on earth. By then, he'd taken a hiatus from music. And as he put down his horn, he picked up his drug habit again. Word around town was that he'd sunk to his lowest. I had gotten to know Miles's eldest daughter, Cheryl, during the years when Miles and I were first together in 1975. With desperation in her voice, she called me. "We can't find father," she said, referring to Miles, as she and her siblings always did. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "What do you mean you can't find him, Cheryl?" I asked. "Nobody has seen or heard from him," she replied. "He had went out to San Francisco weeks earlier," she told him, "but since then, neither his housekeeper, Berlina, nor anybody else in the family had gotten a call." In California, Miles had been staying with a couple that he knew well, the same friends who had breathed life back into him years earlier when he had overdosed. They were the ones who told her he was missing. "Well, I have no idea where he is," I told her, though I hadn't seen Miles since the day he had strumbled into my hotel, sweet stoned, and though we'd certainly had our moments of strife, I of course still regarded him as a friend. As a friend, I was concerned. I knew the couple that Miles had stayed with and called them myself. I wish to God I could recall their names, but time has dimmed that from my memory. The wife answered when I rang. When they hadn't heard from Miles for a couple of days, her husband had put out the word around town, even asking about him in the dope houses Miles had frequented. "We've talked to everybody we know," she told him. "We've gone to every place that he hangs out. Even asked about him among the dealers. Nobody has seen him." Over the next week, I checked in with both the woman and Cheryl. "Any luck?" I asked. "Dead or alive?" No word. Finally, the following week, a dealer spotted Miles in a street gutter. His face was covered in vomit, his eyes glued shut. He was unconscious, in a drug coma. The man leaned over, took Miles's pulse, and once he realized he was still alive, he called the couple. The husband arrived a short time later. To avoid unfavorable press attention, he decided against taking Miles to the hospital. Instead, he and the dealer hoisted Miles's limp body into the backseat of the car. He then drove him to his home and called Cheryl, who called me. "We found him," she told him, relief in her voice, "and he's alive." That evening, the husband sat Miles up on the side of the bed, and Miles then tried to stand, but as he did, his legs buckled under and collapsed. The couple on each side of Miles lifted him up and led him to the bathroom. They let him take a shower, the husband said, hoping some cool water would hasten his recovery. Miles sat on the tub's edge, looking down at his feet and up at the shower head as the waterfall descended. They dried him off and put him on some clean PJs and helped him back into bed. He was still mute. That dear couple hovered over Miles as he alternated between chills and sweats and nausea brought on by his drug withdrawal. Finally, after 3 weeks, he was strong enough to fly home to New York. When the couple told him how worried I had been, he began weeping. Cheryl called me with the news of Miles's recovery and travel plans, saying that when she talked to him, he sounded like himself. Miles and I never spoke directly at that time. Frankly, there was little to say. My concern was from afar, an act of friendship born purely out of my care for him. Had spoken clearly enough. Okay, guys, so that is chapter 17. And oh, wow. So we see that Cicely, she had a chance to work on a film all the way in Moscow. Wow, it's amazing how your career can take you in so many different places. But she also was a woman of her word. So I feel like the way Cicely is or was, if she said she was going to do something, she did it. And she expected others to do the same, which I really love. When she left Moscow, she's like, "Oh, look, I've done my part. It's time to go." And she was out of there. That part really stood out to me because she demanded respect, but that's because she gave respect. And also she was a woman of deep love. So go ahead, guys, and share what your thoughts are on chapter 17. I hope you enjoyed this reading. Thank you guys so much. Until our next video.